Excellent. So welcome to the panel on deployment of instant and inclusive payment system, our first panel in this two-day event on leading inclusive and equitable economies. My name is Xavier Martin. I'm Deputy Director at Digital Frontiers Institute, and I will be moderating this panel. I have the pleasure to be today with two people who probably know the most about the nuts and bolts of how these new instant payment systems are being deployed around the world. At the right of my screen, I have William Cook. He works at CGAP, a global partnership of leading development organizations with the goal of advancing the lives of poor people, especially women, through financial inclusion. Will is based in Nairobi and has researched inclusive instant payment systems extensively. In fact, earlier this year, he co-authored the guide Building Faster Better, a practical resource to understanding and promoting interoperability in digital financial services. I will be sure to share the link to this guide on the chat so you can all check out this great resource. And at the left of my screen, I have Stephen Hawley, Economic Development Manager at ModusBox. ModusBox, for those who don't know, it's a fintech software company focused on the deployment of payment network infrastructures. Steve is based in Mumbai and has participated in several deployments of inclusive instant payment systems around the world. And like William, he's also a very good friend of DFI. So thank you both for joining us today. Those of you joining us in the audience today, we will have some time at the end of the panel for your questions and comments. So please feel free to participate by writing your questions in the chat. So let me open the conversation with a very basic question. This is a summit on inclusive and equitable economies. So let's start with this. How can instant payments help individuals and promote financial inclusion? Will either of you, Steve or Will, want to start on that?
Sure, I can jump in. Yeah, I guess I might first try to parse this question a little bit of whether we're talking about instant payments, just the nature of payments that are instant, versus interoperable payment systems and that infrastructure. If we're talking just about instant as 24/7 real time, then, we're in a conversation around M-Pesa and all these things that we've talked about for the past decade and the value of real-time payments. I think, where on interoperable payment systems, I might narrow the scope a bit. And for us, that's much more about these issues of user experience, being able to, provider A being able to communicate to provider B, but then also some of these adjacencies as far as opening towards competition, new types of entities coming in. But Steve.
I think that was a great framing, Will. I agree. I think we've, hopefully most people have already hashed through the idea of, yes, the idea of pushing money from a wallet to a wallet in real time is something that is going to drive inclusion for a lot of reasons. But having them interoperable and having them move, particularly because the interoperability, in my opinion, allows us to move beyond the primary P2P use case, which is what most previous kind of siloed instant payment systems like M-Pesa focused on. The idea of the instant and inclusive interoperable real-time payment systems or faster payments, I think for me, the main driver is those other use cases, allowing us to move just beyond P2P, and also allowing us to meet the clients where they are, because people of different socioeconomic backgrounds across the world are transacting with each other and are transacting across segments. And so in order for us to be able to transact across segments, whichever financial institution I use needs to be able to transact instantly with whatever financial institution somebody else uses. And so I think that's why it's driving financial inclusion. But I think we're going to get into a lot of details around the structure of it, the participation models, the use cases. So I think all of those things together are what's driving it. And the biggest one, though, for me is the cost will be a major driver. Using push payments, using interoperable payments, using shared infrastructure allows for us to bring costs down. because of some of the fraud risks that are built into a lot of pull payments. And I think that's what we're seeing as a big driver of usage by.
Thank you, Steve. And taking it from here, from your comment on use cases, no, I will ask you about that. No, which are the main use cases and innovations that you have seen addressed through instant and inclusive payment systems? There is any particular example, any particular country or use case that you really have seen doing that right? I think Steve is frozen, so maybe you can.
Oh, okay, yeah. I was going to allow him to come in first on this one, but I'll go again. Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, I think if we look at interoperable payment systems that we've seen emerge across markets today, you know, at the beginning, we've seen a close mirroring of how those systems have enabled, based on the development of the closed loop business models. So in the same way that you saw M-Pesa and other closed loop systems start with P2P and these sorts of use cases, you're seeing the same thing logically, you know, in terms of interoperable systems. Where I think it's getting a little bit interesting now is that as this next use case, increasingly these systems are turning towards merchant payments as a second tier. To some extent, bulk payments driven by things like G2P payments and social protection initiatives. But merchant payment seems to be where a lot are going with things like request to pay infrastructure and so on. And I think here is where we're also starting to see a split between the approach of developed markets and developing markets. I think across the board, you've seen P2P as an initial use case over the past 5 to 10 years of these systems. But now that we're getting into merchant payments, we're seeing that different type of customer experience have real impacts on the design of systems. So if you look at the UK, at Australia, you know, the types of services they're now rolling out around mandates and recurring payments are much more geared towards a wealthier person's use case around remote bill payments, e-commerce, whereas some of the things we're seeing around QR codes and proximity merchant payments in developing markets is much more catered towards this in-person merchant payment.
Excellent, Steven. We were talking about the main use cases and innovations that we have seen on instant and inclusive payment systems. I don't know if you have anything to add there. If not, maybe let me ask you another question, because you were before Steve was mentioning about the issues on governance and how to get the right structure to make that work. No, so. What do you think are the main elements to get the right momentum and the right stakeholders to deploy instant and inclusive instant payment systems?
Yeah, I mean, I think the big caveat, you know, to my answer to this question is that there are lots of approaches that can work. I mean, I think almost any approach that you can think of, we've seen somewhere in the world that you've gotten to a successful implementation with it. But if I had to boil this down to reduce, you know, to my best advice for you know, a market starting off on this path, it would really be I guess the first and foremost around that public-private collaboration. You know, I think where you see regulators driving an agenda without sufficient input from industry, that's where you run into real risks around lack of buy-in, around not having the skin in the game, the financial commitment to actually drive the success of a service. And conversely, you know, we've seen cases where things that are purely private sector driven don't have the sufficient regulatory buy-in. They haven't done the due diligence to actually get the approvals and the go-to-market necessary to get that backing into launch. So that would be one. And the other is it looks a little bit, it comes top of mind for me, it looks a little bit past the state of go live. And that's really this difference between projects and ongoing systems or solutions. Because I see a lot of markets looking at instant payment systems as a project. You know, we're going to do it for the next 3 years, and then we'll have it, we'll launch it, and we'll be done, and the market will be fixed. But, you know, with the degree of innovation you see happening in this, you know, by the time you launch something in 2 years, it's already almost going to be out of date if you're setting a starting line from today. So it's really building those robust governance structures and having that team in place that's going to be the ones to get up every day and think about how can I improve this system over the next week or month or year.
Excellent. Steve, do you have anything to add in terms of these main elements, no, of having the right stakeholder, the right time, the right momentum for deploying?
I think Will's points are probably the two. I mean, those are great points. And so rather than add to them and confuse it, I'd rather dive a little bit deeper into the two. So, and I agree with him completely. All of these things have worked and all of these things have not worked. So it's very hard to say what is the magic factor. I think in terms of having that stakeholder and private sector engagement, one of the things that we've seen that an aspect of that I've seen it work better at is complete openness. Like if a regulator brings in 5 or 3, most countries have 3 or 4 big banks and 2 big mobile money companies. If the regulator has a closed door meeting and brings in those 5 entities and that's the engagement, those entities are going to love it, but the rest of the market isn't. And the rest of the market isn't going to have that kind of understanding. And so what I would say is where we've seen it very interesting is where, I mean, you have folks like BI, Bank Indonesia, that has published its roadmap. Rwanda with RNDPS has published its roadmap. And so the more that these things are not just not just collaboration, but very open collaboration, where they're not only saying to a closed group of their private sector stakeholders, they're actually saying to the whole world, this is what we are trying to do. And that makes it easier for everybody to have input and start preparing and start understanding what their needs are and then providing back and forth. We've even seen it with similarly, the US Fed did it with FedNow with a very open public back and forth after they did some pretty wide stakeholder engagement as well. So I think I would agree that's probably the most important thing. And again, making it so that it's not just a small group of financial service providers, but very public in terms of the output. In terms of the second point, that should remind me what your second point was. I was too excited about the first one. I had a
the point that Will was making about having the right stakeholders. I mean.
Oh no, so yeah, having the right stakeholders, but also that it's a process. That was the other thing. So this, I completely agree. And this is one of the changes. So I work for a technology company. So obviously this is, I look at things sometimes in terms of how does it affect our lives as a technology company when the process is not, it doesn't fall within our vision. We would like countries to think of this as building infrastructure that they're going to have forever. This is something that, this is not like you said, it's not a 3-year project. It's not a 5-year project. You're not going to hire a vendor to do X and then you walk away and you're done and that's it. This should be something that you're building, not just your local capacity of hiring a vendor to come in and build this system for you. You should be building your entire capacity of all of your system integrators, all of your technology companies, all of your payments experts within the country to be able to contribute to this in an ongoing fashion. This is now an industry that you have. Like, you don't hire a company to build all the roads in your country and then walk away. It's a constant maintenance and upgrading and oh, now we need roads that go this direction. Great, let's add on to it in this direction. This never goes away. This is not something that ends. And so start off by thinking of, am I locking myself into a path or an idea or a vendor or a use case that is going to mean I'm stuck with something? Always be thinking of, is this going to mean I'm stuck with this forever? Because the cost of changing, if you have an ongoing forever project, is immense.
Mm-hmm. And Steve and Will, as you know, we offer several courses on these topics at BFI, and one question that we often hear at the classroom on campus is about the existing payments infrastructure, how all these new deployments are affecting the rails that already exist, particularly in terms of the card giants. So do you think that national payment systems will eventually replace the payment rails created by the card giants, or they are complementary? How are you seeing this coexistence?
I'll say I hope so. But actually, I mean, being a little facetious, I think for me as a Visa MasterCard customer who likes my ability to claw back my money and is willing to pay for certain transactions that I do, that 3% additional fee in order to get that extra service, then great. For those transactions, I'm very happy to do that. But I also still want to be able to transact with merchants that are not willing to pay that transaction fee. And so I hope that eventually actually they coexist. But in the end, I think that it'll be a migration. I think that the card giants will eventually adjust their business models to understand how they can add value to an open, inclusive, real-time payments infrastructure, as long as that is what folks like regulators in the World Bank are driving the world towards. Of an open and inclusive instant payment ecosystem. And then the card giants are going to have to be forced to understand how do they fit into that world. And I think we've seen that. MasterCard has a strategy that we've seen rolling out with them owning and operating infrastructure in a number of countries. And I think Visa is also coming out with a very different but interesting strategy around offering their services to instant payment services. So I'm hoping that that side of their business continues to grow so that they can be supportive of us, of building open and inclusive infrastructure. With the big caveat being, I'm really hoping everybody's watching for how to make sure we don't have monopolies that control what use cases and who gets to play. And so as long as the way in which not just the card players play, but the big tech like Google and others play is doing it in a way that we're not locking ourselves out of being inclusive. So I'm very happy for them to be involved. I hope that they adjust their business models to be involved. And I think they're all doing so. But I do hope that the World Bank and others that are helping influence this strategy are able to make sure that it's being influenced in a way that stays inclusive.
Yeah, Steve, that's a great answer. I mean, I think I might separate this out into two levels of domestic card infrastructure and the international schemes. You know, what I've seen for instant payment systems, there's probably an even more immediate sort of existential threat for legacy local infrastructure providers. But what I've seen a number of projects do on new, especially regulator-led instant payment systems, is that they've been sort of aware of these issues for domestic infrastructure, and at least initially, in some cases, have carved out domestic card switching from the mandate of, you know, whatever new technology solutions being proposed, at least for you know, some amount of time to make sure that you're not sort of undermining local business. On the international card schemes thing, yeah, I'm not too worried about Visa and MasterCard surviving, you know, the next 10 years. I think they'll be okay, especially given that so much of their revenue model and especially profitability is driven from international card transactions. And I don't think we see, you know, domestic instant payment systems encroaching into that too soon.
And with COVID-19,
sorry. Well, I would say with the one exception of, I think that there's, I completely agree with you. I do think though that when domestic schemes start really scaling out merchant payments at scale, I don't know who's in the audience right now, but I have a feeling we're going to see more resistance than we've been feeling from the international card schemes when we start seeing large countries eating into their potential merchant transactions. Currently, in countries where they have been more engaged, it's primarily focused on P2P, and as long as they can find something there. But I agree. I think they're fine for the next 20 years, and I think it's going to be fine anyway. I would just say I think we need to be careful of as long as that we're continuing to have that collaboration with the international card schemes as we encroach on P2P, particularly cross-border P2P, which a lot of people like BIS and others are. If you start looking at how RTPs interoperate with each other, I mean, you see a lot of it happening in Southeast Asia, with MPCI and MAS and Nets doing a lot of instant. I mean, I can use my UPI apps in Singapore now. Now that's a very one-off, very specific transaction. But as that becomes more common, I think we'll start seeing a little bit more reticency from the card schemes.
Yeah, good point. I mean, and almost a good call to action. I think of myself as an American in Kenya. I pull out my Visa card. Merchants have the branded sticker on the door. What's the pathway towards me being able to use, my US PayPal account for in a merchant transaction? It seems very far away, but perhaps it shouldn't be. And maybe that's an indictment more of US payment infrastructure than anything else.
I really think that the US payment infrastructure, maybe we just carve that off as a separate problem. Yeah.
I was going to ask you about how has the COVID-19 pandemic affected the interest for deploying faster and more inclusive payment systems? Have you seen a difference here?
I mean, I'd say yes. I'm guessing, yeah. The number of countries that have approached us to say, hey, can you do something and we want it in the next 3 months has been unfortunate for the points that Will was bringing up before of this is a process. You should really do your background. You should have the governance right and all these other things to say, hey, we want you to build this in 3 months, but we don't know exactly what it is also frustrating. So there's been a lot of quick demands, but to be frank, I haven't, and maybe Will has other experience. I haven't seen any of that urgency for demand play out into live systems. I've just seen a lot of questions and momentum that didn't have enough groundwork to make it, in my opinion, incredibly successful yet. But I think we've seen movement though, for sure.
Well, Steven, let me stop with my questions here because now we want to be sure to involve the audience here too. And let's go to some of the questions from the chat because I see that it's a very active chat. There are many questions. So I will start picking, for example, from Kombe, from the Central Bank of Zambia. And I will read here. With the growing number of payment system rails from online payments gateways, global SWIFT networks, RTGS infrastructure, regional payment systems infrastructure like SAT, RTGS, COMESA, etc., mobile financial services, and now current CBDCs from central banks. With all that, what are your views on the need for 24/7 IIPS, and how do we standardize and promote common standards for interoperable for global IIPS payment system platforms? So the question is on how we really can standardize beyond domestic instant payment systems, no, and look for other more global payment systems. No, what are the keys there? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah. It's interesting. We're kind of back to the cross-border thing, and it's interesting. I mean, that long list that you just cited, I think highlights as part of my answer, which is that, it feels in part like we keep solving the technology challenge, and there are solutions available already in a number of ways, but not necessarily solving the scheme challenge. So that example I gave of, coming to Kenya with my Visa card and seeing the logo. If I cross borders today in East Africa, go to Uganda from Kenya, the MFS Africa facilitates a corridor, linking of accounts. There are ways to pass payments, and there are switches in both countries. A lot of that tech infrastructure exists to facilitate passing payments. But at the same time, I can't today pay, at a merchant in Uganda with my M-Pesa account. And that comes back to some of these broader, political, economic, governance, and scheme level discussions. How are we managing the rules of these transactions and opening?
I see here another question on pool payments. No, so there is one participant that want to know a little bit more if we can include pool payments, or we can, or can we not see this happening anytime soon? No, so why we always hear about push payments when we talk about instant and inclusive payment systems? Maybe any of you can elaborate a little bit why that's usually the case.
Yeah, I'll give my view. I mean, I think I kind of mentioned earlier that pull payments because of who is authorizing the idea that I'm giving my credentials to somebody else and allowing somebody else to pull money out of my account has inherent risks that are going to add costs to the entire system. And so the fundamental feeling behind or rationale behind not enabling pull payments is to limit that risk of fraud. There's plenty of people that have debates about that. That's my view on it. Also, the other thing is that push payments, again, feels more like cash. I am taking out my money and I'm pushing money to you. And other people can debate on that all they want. That's my opinion. I think, and I think it's we've seen it play out in a number of places. I want to go back to your previous question though as well quickly, is just to say, because it's teed up what I do. How do we have standards? And I agree with Will. It's having the schemes, and that is a step to go. And that's Will's point of this is a process. We're not going to have interoperable cross-border payments tomorrow or anytime soon. First, we have to get the domestic one right, but those domestic schemes have to be on a process and have to be thinking, what decisions am I making that's going to make it easier or difficult for me to eventually be part of the global real-time payments scheme? In terms of technology, I'll just say using technology standards like ISO 20002, and I have to make a plug for, I work on ModusBox, which is an open source system. We believe that having an open source technology for real-time payments is the way to have standards, because then just like the internet built off of open source, every country could be using a very similar standard. So my quick little pitch on having standards for technology to drive that.
Excellent. And just to close, because we have many questions, but we are running out of time. No, we have many questions on India, and I know that Steve, you are based there, and Will, you have researched quite a lot on that. I don't know if you know, some people are asking about lessons for Africa from the Indian experience. I don't know if you have like a headline about that, and maybe a final question, and you can pick whatever you with question you prefer. Is another question about what business models are available for third-party providers in IIPS, no? How they can increase IIPS uptake, no? What's the role of third-party providers? Maybe you can comment a little bit on these two issues, or at least on one of them.
I'll just do the India one, because I'll just say that third-party payment initiation, PISP, is the big driver. Nobody uses their bank app to make a payment. Nobody even uses very few people even use a stored value wallet like a traditional mobile money app to make payments. Most people are using third-party payment providers like GPay and PhonePe. That's where almost all, and WhatsApp and others, that's where almost all transactions are going. And just like the international card schemes created an overlay, which made it so that I don't have to have a Bank of America card. I have a Visa card powered by Bank of America. I think that real-time payments will get scale just like they did in India globally, when we have overlay services, so that we don't have to rely on our banks to provide us with a good payments experience. So to me, I think payment initiation service provider, PISP, is the innovation of India that will drive inclusion.
Will, I don't know if you have anything to add in this last minute that you have.
Yeah, I'll answer the business models question, but my answer is going to be the same as Steve's actually, and PISP, and because I don't think we've seen instant payment systems open up account provider space necessarily to high levels of competition. But what we have seen is that deepening the PISP frameworks and the types of fintechs that can play. And even, to the answer about the pull-like systems, things like request to pay and the service providers allowing those sorts of functions, buy now, pay later. I think once you have those interoperable rails, we get back to this competition and innovation question, and that's where you start to see this mushrooming of opportunity.
Unfortunately, we are just about out of time for the panel. So Will, Steven, it's been great to have you with us, sharing your insights on payments. We look forward, as always, to having the chance to work with you again soon in the future. And audience, thank you for your attention and participation. I'm looking forward to the rest of the summit, and I hope to see you there too. So goodbye for now. Thank you very much.